Court, real quickly, have we had any more granularity on the impact?
So basically, when I spoke to Jeff Gannett this morning, what he said to me is, look, the first three really levels of tariffs have not had a huge effect on us. Furniture is a category that Macys would be affected in. The 10% they were able to figure out, 25% is a little more painful, but for the most part, they're figuring it out. But if we go to tranche 4, Gannett says, I mean, this is going to be really hard. He said it's very hard to make the math work, even with the mitigation strategies that they're going through, to not increase prices at least some level to the customers. But they're not really saying exactly what they figured out yet, or if they figured it out, because we know that's actually not yet at least a reality. But it could happen. And the way these stocks are trading, I think the market thinks it's going to come.
That's what I was going to ask, Lorraine. So you cover Macys, right? So, why? I mean, down 27% this year. Is there a company level rationale for that, or do you think it's just discounting what happens if those hikes go up?
Well, I think there's a couple things going on in retail right now. Last year was a great year for the U.S. consumer. You had higher wages, you had tax cuts. It was a really strong year for spending. This year it's still good, but not as good as last year.
So it's a macro issue in part for the U.S. consumer. And are there any, I know I guess this is more of an economist question, but we saw it again this morning, that it's amazing how volatile retail sales have been. We had this terrible December number and a great January. Now we've had a bad April. And why, I mean, any sense as to why the environment is so much more volatile and hard to figure out?
I mean, part of it, I cover apparel, and weather really plays a factor. I stepped out of my house this morning, it was 45 degrees out. That's not normal May 15th weather.
Right.
So that really pushes the spring selling further into May. So I think that did hurt April to a certain degree. But we also think that, the consumer, as their wages aren't going up quite as much anymore, probably a little more discerning with what they're buying.
Court, same question. I mean, we're down 20% for the kind of broad sector from the highs, and so far the U.S. the GDP numbers have been okay. I mean, I understand that there's fits and starts, but this has been a better start to the year than we would have thought.
I agree, Kelly, and I think it's funny when people ask me, so how's retail going? I say, it's okay. It's not bad. It's not great. And some folks are figuring it out better than others. I think for a long time, investors were giving retailers a pass and allowing them to spend the money that they needed to invest in this omni-channel experience. I think some of that patience is starting to wear out, and now they really want to see some of those investments pay off on the profitability side. And so I think that that's probably some of it too. And then they want to make sure that all of that money that they did invest was worth it, and that consumers are buying both in store and online, and that we don't see any more big store closures. Because while that's healthy in some cases, you do need some of these stores to make that omni-channel strategy work.
So Lorraine, who is, you think, sort of best positioned in this kind of environment to continue to do well in terms of retail?
We really like the off-price retailers like TJ Maxx, Ross Stores, Burlington. They've been huge market share gainers over the past few years, and we think that continues. Generally, disruption is very good for off-price. And so tariffs, while maybe they pose a little bit of a near-term pressure, should be very good for them.
Interesting, because they'll just get more of that inventory and more. So what about the department stores?
We're generally pretty negative on the department stores. Kohl's being our only buy, the rest we're underperform on. So we think that there's still a lot of pressure on the department stores in general, and you need some really out-of-the-box, interesting other sales-driving ideas.
Like Kohl's with Amazon returns.
Exactly.
Yeah. And what about specialty then?
Specialty is tough. It's very difficult. We think there are a few that have gotten a little bit too cheap. I'd put Urban Outfitters in there, Tapestry in there, but there are some that we just look at as long-term secular market share donors.
Donors. Courtney, you don't want to be a market share donor.
You really don't want to be a market share donor, do you? You want to try to be gaining. And to that point today, when I spoke with Jeff Gannett at Macys, he said, look, there were years where we were losing share, and we are at least now narrowing that gap in some of our categories. So they're making their way back, but they've still got a ways to make up, I think, too. And they're in that department store space, which just in general is a tough place to be.